afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The hours after lunch is the most refreshing part of any event. When I was told that the panel I would be moderating starts at 2:30, I was very glad. Of course, I'm joking. I was more worried than happy. Anyways, it is fantastic to be here today, and also we are extremely lucky that we have a number of very important people, those who have been working on the ground on the issues of humanitarian as well as human rights, but also people who provide basic social services to the people on the ground. They are with us today, and we'd love to hear from them. The Afghan participants of this event come from diverse background, but one of probably the common feature among the absolute majority of the people here is that we have all been forcefully displaced from our country, our province, at one point of the time in the last 30 years. Like a lot of Afghan events, I would like to start by reciting a poem from Qanbar Ali Tabish, an Afghan poet who lives in Iran as a refugee. آدمی پرنده نیست تا به هر کران که پر کشد برای او وطن شود. سرشت برگ دارد آدمی، برگ چو از بلند شاخه اش جدا شود پایمال آبران کوچه ها شود. A very rough translation would be, birds build a nest wherever their wings take them. Humans are not birds. Perhaps we are rather like leaves. For once separated from their beloved branches, they are bound to be crushed by pedestrians. The very reasons, unfortunately, that have made that the Afghans, large population of Afghans, are displaced internally, as well as they have been forced to seek asylum and refuge in neighboring and far diaspora, are continuing to persist in Afghanistan. The armed conflict, the continuing disasters, natural disasters, as well as the rapid urbanization in Afghanistan have forced many people to be internally displaced. 2014 is a key transition year for Afghanistan, with the presidential elections planned in April 2014 and the withdrawal of international security forces scheduled at the end of this year. There is a broad international consensus that assistance for institutional building will continue to be needed during this transition period. In this context, Afghanistan's security situation is likely to remain complex. The number of internally displaced people, or IDPs, is currently estimated at some 600,000 people. This figure may rise further in this year. Although the government of Afghanistan respects the principle of non-refoulement, as asylum seekers and refugees face protection concerns related to the volatile security situation and difficulties in accessing basic services. Afghanistan continues to face significant humanitarian challenges, which are exacerbated by security situation, economic insecurity, and limited capacity of the government to provide basic access to basic services. National and international NGOs, which have been providing basic services to the most vulnerable communities, may be limited in this transition period. Moreover, continued conflict, recurrent drought and other natural disasters, rapid urbanization, and disproportionately high number of young people in the country pose formidable challenges to efforts and encourage return and create an enabling environment for sustainable reintegration. A fall in refugee returns may also be associated with increased uncertainty about security in the view of 2014 elections and the withdrawal of international security forces. Afghanistan continues to be the world's largest repatriation operation for the UN. Over 5.7 million Afghans, roughly a quarter of the population, have voluntarily returned home since 2002. Yet, a substantial number of returnees have not fully reintegrated in the absence of socio-economic opportunities and still need assistance. To talk about that and other issues, for the internally displaced people, but also for the Afghans who live near and far diaspora. We have today among us Mr. Renzo Frick, who is the operation coordinator in Afghanistan for MSF, or the Doctors Without Borders. We have Ms. Rehana Popal from More Aid. We have, as you may have already know, Claire Quaid from the European Campaign for Human Rights for the people of Afghanistan. And then we have two people joining us through Skype, one from Kabul and the other from Greece, who are both human rights activists. Mr. Abdul Ghafour from Kabul and Mr. Mohammad Mirzai from Greece. The way we'd like to do this presentation today would be to allow our distinguished speakers 7 to 10 minutes, especially for those who join us through Skype, a complete 10 minutes, because they won't be able to engage us with the question and answer session afterwards. But I'd like the other speakers to give more time for the Q&A if possible. So can I ask at the beginning Mr. Renzo Frick, and just a quick introduction about Mr. Renzo Frick before that. He is the operations coordinator in Afghanistan for the Doctors Without Borders. Unfortunately, that is the only information I have. But I promise better information for the other participants. Mr. Frick, to you.
Thank you. Well, indeed, the introduction is correct. The only thing is that I'm not based in Afghanistan, I'm based in Brussels, and indeed coordinating the MSF interventions not only in Afghanistan but also in Pakistan, which gives me a regional overview of some of the topics that were discussed this morning. I may apologize already at the beginning for the first slide because there might be other issues. The presentation was loaded on the PC and it's a Mac here, so there's some issue with the presentation. So MSF, as some of you might know, is an international medical humanitarian organization. Was founded in 1971. We got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1999. We're working in many countries, around 70. We try to respond to medical needs in various environments, whether they are related to conflicts, natural disasters, outbreaks, healthcare exclusions. We strictly adhere to humanitarian principles, which means that independence, neutrality, and impartiality are key for us. These days, you might have heard some of our ongoing activities in certain areas like South Sudan, Central African Republic, Syria, of course. Afghanistan, we have 4 projects. I'm going to present them quickly afterwards. As the introduction of Jawed was quite clear, I can go very quickly in my own introduction, which of course is that 2014 is going to be a key year for Afghanistan. The international community is focused on the timeline of troop withdrawal, transition, upcoming elections. And in this narrative, probably health is often considered as one of the success stories of the international intervention, and certainly some improvements have been made over the last decade. But from what our teams see in the hospitals every day in the country, in Afghanistan, added to the escalation of conflict in some areas, maybe it's more difficult for us to be positive. As we see an increased and massive gap between the rhetoric and the reality. So there should be a map that you don't see. So these are the 4 projects, or the 4 hospitals MSF is currently either running by itself as a private structure or supporting the MOPH, the Ministry of Public Health. So MSF began working in Afghanistan in the early 80s. We had to leave the country in 2004 following killing of 5 colleagues. And we returned in 2009 following increased needs and deterioration of the security situation. So today we run 4 projects. in Kabul, in the eastern part of the city, in District 12, in an area called Ahmed Shababa, for those who know, in Lashkargah, in Helmand capital province. In those two structures, we support the Ministry of Public Health. And in addition to that, we run two MSF private structures, in the north in Kunduz and in the southeast in Khost. Just a few numbers. I don't want to bore, to knowing too much with numbers, but just to show that what we do in Afghanistan is quite massive. You can see some of these numbers: almost 100 international staff, almost 2,000 Afghan staff. This is not including the MOPH staff that are under incentive. And you see a bit the number of patients we currently see. For example, more than 30,000 babies delivered in 2013, which is an average because we have maternities in 3 of our 4 programs, which means that it's almost an average of 1,000 deliveries a month in those 3 structures. The 4th one being a trauma hospital, so we don't do deliveries. In terms of budget, you see it's quite massive also, and particularity of MSF is that we, in this kind of environment, political and conflict environment, we use only private funding, so 100% in private donors. So it's very difficult, to not say impossible, maybe to have a clear picture of the humanitarian needs in many areas of the country. Over the past decade, the access for humanitarian organizations, including for MSF, to the most volatile areas has been drastically reduced. Unfortunately, today most aid providers are kind of bunkerized in the either base hospitals or actually towns. And for those reasons, there is really an absence of reliable data to give a truly accurate picture of the situation and of the needs of the populations. Unfortunately for MSF too, we are limited in working in these hospitals, which is not the usual, I would say, normal modus operandi compared to other countries. But this is because of security reasons. Based on our experience, I can say that most of the humanitarian needs in the country are mostly unmet. And as the slide here presents, probably the country has some of the worst health indicators in the world, especially in terms of child and maternal mortality. Other indicators which are either direct conflict-related trauma, recurrent outbreaks, frequent natural disasters, either earthquakes, floods, drought. It was mentioned also in the introduction earlier in the day, changing profile of population with increased urbanization and an increased number of youth, IDPs, returnees either from Pakistan or Iran. What I will detail a bit further later is the failure of what we call the BPHS and EPHS, which is the national system of health, whether it's a basic package of the enhanced package of health system, reduction of international aid because of the withdrawal of international troops. There's no magic bullet, but the aid that is provided by countries has been reduced and is going to continue to be reduced. And finally, from our point of view, a real lack of independent humanitarian aid actors. I just want to sit beside MSF, Emergency and the ICRC, which to me are doing an excellent work. So to try to further explain a bit what is our vision in terms of our understanding of the humanitarian needs and how to try to depict or describe the situation in which the population is today. MSF has worked since a few months now on a study with aiming to describe the barriers patients face while trying to access healthcare. Today I'm going to present you kind of preliminary results because the full report is going to be out only in a few weeks' time. So this survey took a long time because more than 650 patients in the 4 projects were interviewed with focus groups, individual discussions too. So I'm going to go through the main families, the main points that were expressed by patients. So I'm going to go through insecurity. I'm going to talk about the distance barrier. I'm going to talk about the cost, dysfunction and distrust of the national system, and some, especially for today, additional barriers faced by women.
Renzo, can you do all these in 2 minutes?
No. I could do in 2 minutes, but then it's going to be very short. So 5 minutes. I can do it in 5 minutes. So insecurity, I'm going to go really through the main points and just for you to see the data that will be on the slides. So violence and insecurity is the most striking barrier that people have overcome in the search of basic life-saving healthcare. As well as maiming and killing directly, the violence also does indirectly by impeding access to healthcare, thereby increasing the chances of deteriorating health condition or even death. So just some data. So about almost 20% who knew someone, around 17% of the people who were interviewed knew someone who had died within the last year because of lack of access to healthcare. Around a third of the people interviewed or someone close to them suffered violence within the same year, and you see what were the reasons. And almost half of the people said that insecurity prevented them accessing the MSF hospital. For those who managed to reach our structures, for example in Kunduz, you see 43% of the patients with whom we talk dealt with either direct violence, landmines, criminality, harassment, checkpoints from different actors. Another aspect of insecurity, I'm really going to go further faster, is the travel at night. Insecurity, of course, is present during the day, but even more during the night. You see a quarter of the patients say it's just impossible to travel at night. When you are a mother who is going to deliver very soon, you basically jeopardize the life of both the mother and the child, the baby.
I'd like to ask Rehana Popel, and before asking her to have her words, I'd like to introduce her a little in more detail than I did to Renzo. Rehana Popel has recently qualified as a barrister from the City Law School as a member of the Honourable Society of Leonard Temple. Her area of expertise falls within the realm of migration law and policy development. Rehana traveled to Afghanistan for her undergraduate thesis. Her research entailed a number of interviews with key political actors such as Ahmad Wali Karzai, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, and Ahmad Wakil Mutawakkil. Rehana's most recent work include, among others, working as the Afghanistan analyst on the United States drone inquiry team. It's an immense pleasure to have Rehana today.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'll promise I'll keep my speech as short as possible. Thank you for that introduction. Once again, my name is Rehana Popel, and I am the co-director and co-founder of an organisation called More AID. More AID is an organisation which aims to advocate for the rights of those internally displaced by pushing forward humanitarian and economic arguments. Before I begin the crux of my speech, I would like to tell you a story about Nazir Atmar. Nazir was a leading political figure in Afghanistan. She was at the forefront of discussion of women and human rights. Unfortunately, she was a victim of domestic violence. She fled to a women's shelter where she sought protection from her husband. However, she was eventually discovered by her husband, where she was then physically violated again by her husband, and so were the other women at the refuge. That's all right. The Western countries that supported her outspoken advocacy for women's rights and as a politician said their hands were tied. Strict refugees laws meant that they could not help her while she was in Afghanistan. I'll try my best to project. Where was I? Yeah. The Western countries that supported her advocacy for women's rights as a politician said that their hands were tied, and that strict refugee laws meant that for as long as she was in Afghanistan, they cannot help her. The only way she could be protected was by travelling outside her homeland and seeking refuge in another country under the Refugee Convention. She was effectively at the mercy of the government, which was not able to protect her, and nor could anyone else. This is a classic example of the paradox that IDPs find themselves within. The UN attempted to address the issues of IDPs in the 90s by creating the UN Guiding Principles for the Protection of Internally Displaced Persons. A number of legal experts who worked within the international law framework produced a completion and analysis of legal norms which led to the creation of the Guiding Principles. The UNGP have attempted to reinstate existing norms and seek to clarify certain grey areas in the law and apply them directly to IDPs. However, states have refused to ratify the UNGPs into international law, and instead they remain guiding principles. The issue in which the UN was trying to address in providing these individuals with protection was never really met. And till this day, the convention remains a hand without a thumb. In other words, it doesn't provide any form of genuine protection for these individuals. In Afghanistan specifically, the mass scale of movement of people internally has ramifications in other areas, namely economic, education, health, and security. IDPs within Afghanistan are generated mainly for one of two reasons: social or fiscal security. The area in which individuals move in order to attain fiscal security offsets an unequal distribution of human resources. This, in essence, means that a large movement of population from southern provinces like Kandahar and Helmand to safer northern provinces like Kabul and Mazar. This has subsequently led to a prolonging the underdevelopment of the south and the north suffering overpopulation and overstretching of their limited resources. The economic strains caused by IDP situation overspills into other sectors, namely education and health. The effect of IDP movement on the education and health sectors are twofold. Firstly, those who have the capacity to move because of the security risk to the north from the south. I'll use teachers as an example. The movement of teachers from the south to the north of Afghanistan contributes to the underdevelopment or lack of education in the south. Secondly, where IDPs then settle in urban slums, they are then unable to access resources which are key to their development and sustainability, i.e. education and healthcare once again. Security. This has severe ramifications on the security of the country. Namely, these urban slums provide a breeding ground for the radicalization where these individuals are preyed upon due to their exceptional vulnerability and their lack of education and dire means. In rural areas in the south, a similar situation is replicated due to their lack of economic opportunities and limited access to resources. IDPs not only pose a risk to themselves, but also have a rippling effect on the wider community. The situation has been further exacerbated by states, as the migration security nexus has been reignited since September 11th. States are more rigid in patrolling their borders than ever before. This has a direct effect on people who are moving as a result of the conflict, as they are not able to find protection. Namely, individuals cannot cross state borders as readily as they did so before, and therefore cannot seek protection under the Refugee Convention. These individuals continue to remain at the mercy of their state and are not provided any protection under any normative legal framework. And if I can bring you back to the example of Novia I mentioned earlier, that is the situation that most people find themselves within. In dealing with the situation of IDPs in Afghanistan, a multi-level approach is needed by providing durable solutions on a number of planes. These levels consist of the following. Number one, working towards the prevention of the conflict that displaces so many citizens. Number two, providing immediate assistance for those displaced. Number three, providing skills training for forced migrants. Number four, repatriating IDPs. Number five, rehabilitating them in a new environment. And number six, encouraging reintegration either the human in their homeland or new region. I hope today I've been able to illustrate some of the challenges that are ahead in addressing and assisting IDPs. If there is one thing I would like for you to take from today, is that their protection is our security. And in order to protect our security, we need to help to protect these individuals. Thank you very much.
You have already seen Claire quite much today, but has anyone thoroughly introduced her to you? No, I will do it. Claire Quay from the European Campaign for Human Rights for the People of Afghanistan. She has worked for the past 12 years for the European Council on Refugees and Exiles, a pan-European network of over 80 NGOs promoting and protecting the rights of refugees in 35 European countries. She started to work for the European Campaign for the Human Rights of the People of Afghanistan after attending its launch in 2011. So 3 years of successful work. Please.
Thank you. You have seen me today already, and I don't want to speak very long. I just want to give a general introduction to issues of forced displacement for people from Afghanistan who have had to leave Afghanistan, mainly as an introduction to the issues that will be covered by the next two speakers who work on the ground and have a lot more exciting, interesting, tragic and difficult things to talk to you about. So, introduction to the Afghan diaspora, many of you will know. The World Bank likes to split it into two groups of people. Those living in more affluent countries, the EU, 250,000 people, the USA, 100,000 people, Australia, 30,000 people, and the great majority who live in neighbouring countries, Pakistan, 2.5 million people, Iran, 1 million, and of course there are a lot of people from Afghanistan, in Central Asia and Russia. There are many different issues that people face when they leave and try and seek protection overseas. There are quite a few things happening at the moment. We know that in Australia, for example, there's the new boat policy where the Australian government has said we don't actually want people to land on the shores of Australia. We'd like you to go to an island where your claim will be processed, where there are detention facilities in Nauru. There have been a lot of controversy over whether people can physically get there when they're travelling from places like Indonesia that have really poor conditions, terrible detention. There aren't health facilities for people, women, pregnant women, etc. There's also a lot of issues for people who are still in the neighbouring countries of Pakistan and Iran. Pakistan regularly makes announcements about the legal status of permission to stay for refugees and whether they'll have to leave, and the current deadline, I believe, is December 2015. In Iran there are concerns about legal status, deportations, access to education. As people come towards Europe in places like Turkey, it's one of the few countries in the world. I don't know, the Geneva Convention relating to refugees was originally a European document because it was created after World War II when many refugees were from Europe. And Turkey is one of the only countries in the world that didn't accept the broadening of the definition to include refugees from outside Europe. So actually people who get to Turkey, the Turkish government won't process an asylum claim. You're under the mandate of UNHCR. And also Turkey's struggling hugely with a mass influx of refugees from Syria. There are problems getting to Europe. Our next speaker will talk to you about the situation of Greece, pushbacks at the Greek-Turkish border and the problems people are having, literally risking their lives again trying to get to a situation of safety. And if you do get to Europe, you've managed to get to somewhere that's not Greece, and most countries will now not send you back to Greece from Dublin, then there are huge differences in the recognition rates, the reception conditions, and the treatments of refugees in Europe. I just gave you a few statistics. The average recognition rate of refugees from Afghanistan in Europe is 47%. It's 94% in Italy, which is high, but the reception conditions, most people would agree, are quite shocking. Belgium has a high rate of recognition for refugees. The UK is below average. Denmark, lower still, and Greece is a mere 7%. And that is people who have access to asylum procedures in Greece. There are huge numbers of people, unfortunately, who've been living in Greece 7-8 years, who are still living on the streets. Post-2014, obviously we've talked a lot about the security situation and the worsening situation in Afghanistan. The US Special Representative, Jim Dobbins, recently said that now, for the first time since 2001, those leaving the country, it's a higher number than those who are returning. Which, if you think of the pressures of people to return, both in Pakistan, Iran and Europe for different reasons, is quite a shocking thing to say. Voluntary returns is a touchy subject for many people. One of the things the Belgian refugees, the Afghan refugees in Belgium are protesting about is that if you're not given a chance to get a legal status, you've got no documents, nowhere to live, how can you call return voluntary? But there are people who return under voluntary return programs to Afghanistan every year, and in 2012 over 98,000 people did so, many from Pakistan and Iran, and there were over 27,000 people returning in the first half of 2013. Forced returns also happen. The gentleman who will be talking last today, Abdul Ghafoor, he's someone who was returned from Norway, who will be talking about the situation for people who go back to Afghanistan. So there are forced returns from countries, but also with the Dublin Convention, the Common European Asylum System means that usually it's the country you first arrive in that has to process your asylum claim. So if you want to go to Norway because you have community or friends or family that can assist you, and you end up arriving in Italy, then it's very difficult for people to be able to stay in Norway. You would be sent back to Italy for your claim to be processed. I'm very quickly nearly finished. People are talking later about diaspora engagement with Afghanistan. People highlight that the diaspora's return to Afghanistan, working in politics, education, trade. Remittances are an increasing issue. They've been going up steadily to Afghanistan from the diaspora since 2008. And in 2012, the Afghan diaspora sent $385 million back. It's obviously not reached the level of aid that's been given to Afghanistan, but still it's getting increasingly important. And interestingly, Iran is the top country for remittances. Very nearly finished. Belgium. I wanted to talk a little bit about what Afghan refugees are doing around Europe, to talk about the situation in Europe, because I think later we'll be talking about how the diaspora influences Afghanistan. There's a group of Afghan refugees in Belgium who occupied a church, 200 people. They've been protesting about returns to Afghanistan, the fact that they have no reception conditions, no status in Belgium, and they're forcing people to return voluntarily, and it isn't a voluntary choice. And one of their colleagues unfortunately returned to Afghanistan and was killed. They've had a lot of media attention, lots of protests. I did have photos, but they don't show. And they've actually had a petition with 5,000 signatures from Belgian people, MPs, MEPs. So they're doing some great work to highlight concerns there. There's been protests Hungary, Norway, Sweden as well. There are strong community groups working with Afghan refugees. As you know, obviously, many of you here, I met somebody from Germany today who works with Afghan young people across Europe. There's some fantastic work going on. Just to introduce the campaign in 2 words, I work for Dr. Nassimi's campaign, the European Campaign for Human Rights of the People of Afghanistan. We have members in Europe, newsletters, we have representatives in the Netherlands and Germany who've managed to come to the conference. We hope to work with other groups as well. We're looking for partners, advocacy events, seminars. We did a petition to Commissioner Malmström recently at EU level on the conditions in Greece, and we've opened our first development project in Afghanistan. And I'll stop there. Hopefully it wasn't too long. It was a speed through the issues, because I think the next speakers will really tell you about the situation of the people they work with. Thank you.